for Calgary Confederation.
Speaker, today I rise in this House to speak on Bill C-14 and to the issue of medically assisted dying. This is a complex issue for which there are strong opinions on both sides, of course. So some of my comments may be new to this debate, I don't know. Some of my comments will echo those of others before me. However, they are all the voice of my constituents in Calgary Confederation. As my constituent Brenda Robinson said to me in a letter, there is no doubt that we are in a defining moment for our nation on this important issue. So many lives hang in the balance of how our leaders craft this legislation. As I said just a moment ago, that there are many sides to this complex issue. While those watching this debate here tonight and the last couple of days, those people on CPAC and on their computers and in the galleries, they are able to pick and choose the parts of this legislation that they like and what they don't like. But I, and we all here in the House, only have the option of a yay or a nay when it comes to a vote. We know that the legislation will pass. It has to pass because the courts have said so. Now, many of you know, you may not know, but I am a big proponent of palliative care. My assistant, Lou Winters in Calgary, my constituency assistant, was the founder of Hospice Calgary and the executive director there. My late father-in-law was the executive chef at the Rosedale Hospice in Calgary. Spent many of his long life career as an executive chef, many hotels throughout the country. He spent his final years cooking for the dying in the hospice in Calgary. My family for many years have volunteered with Hospice Calgary. Never would I've ever thought that I would be fighting for a bed for my wife one day. I saw then firsthand how critical it is that we have a good palliative care system here in Canada. Through my experience with Hospice Calgary, I also saw firsthand how horribly unfunded this specialized care is within our current healthcare system. We need to improve palliative care both for the patients and their families. I can't thank the staff enough at the Agape Hospice for the support that they gave me and my family only a few years ago. I only wish that all Canadians had the access and support that they need to get palliative care during one of the toughest times in one's life. We need to do better. We can do better, but we have a long way to go. I have received more correspondence on this issue than any other since being elected or during my 10 years as an MLA in Alberta. Normally, we see letters either urging an MP to support or oppose this legislation. However, the inevitability of this legislation has resulted in a different kind of response. My constituents are writing to suggest how things can be improved and to express concerns with very specific parts. This has made for some very emotional and very thoughtful reading. Ken, a constituent in my writing, he wrote to me and said, even though I am personally against all euthanasia on a personal, moral, and faith grounds, I concede that I will probably have to have a law that allows it in extreme circumstances. But many of the current recommendations go far beyond and in effect could allow this to become an on-demand service that leaves many of the most vulnerable unprotected.
So correct.
Ken's letter is just one of many who raised concerns about our most vulnerable. Connie, another constituent, wrote to me, and she is passionately against any form of suicide. She said, my father's death was a gradual decline that spanned a 4-month period. It was a difficult time for him and for the family. However, we shared some very meaningful time together during those 4 months, and I have a new appreciation for the death process. It was painful and it was difficult for him. Unfortunately, struggle is part of human existence. Suicide cuts short the human experience, and no physician should be asked to end a human life. That's what Connie had to say. On the other side of the issue, There are those who wish to have access to these medically assisted options. Valerie wrote to me, and she said that my father and others in my family have had dementia, and I saw how they forgot to bathe and brush their teeth and refused to let others take care of them. My father lived his last 6 months in a nursing bed, doing nothing but laying in bed. If I get dementia, I know I do not want to live like that. If I do not have the option of physician-assisted dying, then I will opt to find a way to end my life while I am still able to make this a decision. I beg you to please allow me a better option should I get dementia. Deborah Lee wrote to me, and she wrote to the Minister of Justice as well, with a perspective that few have, as she worked for over 40 years as a registered nurse. And Deborah said, I saw my share of people die, many of them with good management of their symptoms, but some who did suffer a great deal from physical as well as emotional pain. Some people received intrusive treatments which had no hope of curing them or even easing their suffering. But for too long in my career, I have observed a death-denying culture. Everyone from health providers, family members, and individuals themselves having difficulty accepting death. As I stated earlier, this issue is complex. Another constituent, Catherine G., focused on some of the specific parts of the proposed legislation that she felt needs to be improved. She expressed concerns that there are not enough protection for the vulnerable. She said, I believe that physician-assisted death will leave many elderly people open to the worst form of abuse. They may feel pressure to accept it since they feel themselves to be a burden to their loved ones. We must care for the sick and elderly. Doctors must never kill. Many expressed concern for the most vulnerable in society, but some also wrote about their own vulnerability. Tracy wrote, today my mother is slowly starving to death in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's. Since my grandmother also had it, there is a good chance that I will as well. Without assisted suicide, I will be forced to commit suicide as soon as I am diagnosed, because I won't allow my children to go through what I have, nor do I wish to suffer as my mother has. Doug James, another constituent of mine, echoed my sentiments exactly when he said, I suggest that we are better off having what some will call incomplete legislation rather than no legislation at all, and trust that future legislation can be passed to address any deficiencies. It is for this reason alone that I will be supporting this bill. It is not about a vote of approval for the bill or the circumstances that brought it about. Rather, it is a vote that recognizes that when it comes to something as personal and sensitive as death, it is better to have the options available, even if you don't like them, even if you don't believe in them. It's better to have some legal framework than none at all. My decision will undoubtedly be welcomed by some and loathed by others. But I am confident that my constituents will look at my past, my experiences, and respect that in the absence of an overwhelming and clear direction from my constituents, I am voting for choice. In closing, I want to also echo a deep concern expressed by David McPhail, who wrote to me, and he said that there should be clear, conscious protections for healthcare workers and facilities in the legislation. It is not right that people should be forced to participate against their deeply held convictions, either through referral or by doing the procedure. It is not necessary to make dedicated physicians and healthcare workers put their careers on the line and open themselves up to professional disciplinary action simply because they wish to follow their conscience. Finally, I want to reiterate my main concern in the dying process, and that is palliative care. I challenge all in this House to approach this issue with as much energy, urgency, and focus as we have seen on this bill. I believe that when we all focus on a shared goal, we can achieve remarkable improvements in a very timely fashion. Let's hope we see the same prioritization when it comes to addressing palliative care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened attentively to this other speech, and I hope when this debate is over, we will all recall how much we have in common in our humanity, which we too often forget in politics. My colleague has my full support when it comes to what he said about palliative care, but my question, and I ask this almost every time with every speech I've heard, including my own, we are very often relating our personal experiences with death, and with this bill forces us to change our perspective and take the position of the person who is dying. When I think of my mother who ended her life with such high doses of morphine that she was unconscious, but she wasn't suffering at least. But I wonder, if I were in her shoes, would she not have preferred to die conscious, surrounded by her loved ones, even with some suffering?
Well, thank you, Honourable Member, for that question. I can say that through my experience and through my family's experience, it was very much a relief when my wife finally passed because of the pain and suffering that she went through. And I can't talk much about my experience because I will end up in tears here, and I said to myself that I would not do this. So, but absolutely, we've all sat back these last months and have thought about our loved ones and the loved ones that we have lost. And I know all of us are having a very difficult decision here, and I respect everyone's decision on this. This just happens to be where I stand on this, and that's how I am going to vote. And again, thank you for your question.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is more of a comment than anything else. And I just want to thank our honourable colleague from Calgary Confederation for stepping forward today and sharing with us in this discussion. The motions are obviously very raw, and I just want to say thank you through you, Mr. Speaker, to our honourable colleague for his comments tonight. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary Confederation.
I just want to say thank you back to you for your kind comments, and thank you so much. Okay.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his remarks, and I want to just ask him about the issue of advanced review. There are some, I think, attempted safeguards in this legislation, but without any kind of legal process, without any kind of review process involving anyone with legal authority beforehand, there's no real clear way of ensuring that the criteria will be followed. And this is a big concern of mine, and I wonder if the member would agree that a simple change to this legislation that would institute some system of advanced legal review, maybe replacing the role of one of the witnesses with someone with competent legal authority to make that assessment, maybe requiring a judicial hearing, that this would be an important substantive improvement to this legislation that would go a long way to protecting vulnerable people.
The honourable member for Calgary Confederation.
Well, thank you, Honourable Member. I would agree there is a lot of work with this legislation, and it's just a matter of time before it ends up in the courts again with issues and particular people demanding certain changes to this legislation. It's going to take time, and there's no doubt in my mind that the Supreme Court will have future decisions to be made in this area. But right now, we have been told by the Supreme Court, by the Carter decision, that we must move ahead with this legislation, and this is what we are doing. So, again, thank you so much for your question.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for